Kamala Harris is ending her Democratic presidential campaign. She was initially one of the favorites to take on Donald Trump in the 2020 race. For more, I want to bring in political commentator and pollster Fernand Amandi. He hosts the Strange Days podcast and is a lecturer at the University of Miami's Political Science Department. So, Fernand, what's your initial reaction to that?
Well, the news, Andrew, is really not surprising when you look at the fact that Senator Harris's poll numbers in both the early primary states and at the national level have been gradually declining over the last few months. She entered this race, as you alluded to, with a lot of fanfare, very high expectations, and at one point looked to be the odds-on favorite to win, especially after a very powerful early debate performance in June of this year. But as we see throughout these campaigns for the presidency, they rely on money and they rely on support. And she was really lacking those over the last few months. And that's why I think she has concluded her campaign today.
Why? I mean, she started strongly. At one point, Harris was seen as potentially the most formidable candidate against Donald Trump. So why did she lack the support? Why did she lack the money?
Well, I think some of the recommendations that are coming out now, questions about how the campaign was organized and structured, what the strategic focus was as well. A decision to not necessarily play in South Carolina, which was a state that seemed geared towards her strengths and advantages. There is a tremendous African-American vote in that state. She chose instead to put all of her chips in the early contest of Iowa and yet was not able to gain traction there. I think one of the other elements that folks are looking at, we saw this in Barack Obama's campaign for the presidency in 2008. Oftentimes, a presidential campaign is an indicator of how someone will govern when they are in office as president. Obama's campaign, famous for the no-drama Obama style, very organized, very precise, whereas all throughout the campaign, Harris's candidacy was plagued by infighting and turmoil and organizational issues. And I think all of those factors together have led us to this point where she's now out of the race and the sweepstakes to become the Democratic nominee in 2020.
How much of a factor do you think that she was in such a crowded field, and the field is still so crowded?
Well, indeed it is. And, you know, what one has to keep in mind, there are now still over a dozen candidates in the race. Only one can end up the victor. There's only one survivor in the presidential nomination sweepstakes. But I think the fact that she is a candidate that still had a very, albeit smaller, but impassioned base of support, I think you're going to see the other candidates look to try and court the Harris support base. Not only that, Senator Harris herself is someone who already now is going to be on the short list of whoever emerges as the Democratic nominee's running mate choice, because she brings a lot of attractive qualities to the table. She's young, she's dynamic, she's proved on the campaign to be very articulate. She also is a female and an African American, which represents a very important part of the Democratic base constituency. So I don't think we've heard the last yet of Senator Harris on the national scene.
What's your hunch about where her supporters go?
Well, you know, she was trying to stake out a candidacy that bridged the two elements of the Democratic constituency, the moderate centrist elements and the progressive left elements. So that's going to be the interesting question. I think right now you will certainly see Joe Biden, who there was certainly an effort early on in the race for him to try and enlist her people and her support. You'll see him play there, but also for those two remaining female candidates that have a chance to still win the nomination. Talking, of course, about Senator Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts and Senator Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota. I think you'll see both of those camps try and garner some of that support from Harris supporters who are now looking for who they may want to get behind.
How unusual is it that there are still so many candidates? I mean, this is just, if you were to predict who would win, I mean, that's a challenging thing to do right now, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it is and it isn't. You're correct, Andrew. We are in an unprecedented situation to see really this many candidates this late in the process, certainly on the Democratic side. There have been a baker's dozen before. There have been 6 or 7, but never this many that are still in the 14, 15 candidate count. But the truth of the matter is, looking at it objectively as a political analyst, right now, to my eyes, there are really only 4 or 5 viable candidates that really have a shot at capturing the nomination next year. And this winnowing process is very natural. And actually, as you get into the early part of next year, I think you'll see the race truncate and contract even more. We may be down to less than 10 candidates by the time we get to the new year.
Fernand, thank you. Fernand Amandi in Miami, the political strategist and pollster, is also the host of the Strange Days podcast.